Hello, I'm Trudy Bateman and welcome to this session on Be Your Own Strengths Expert. We're going to be using the Strengths Expert profile and going through some of those additional features to help you make the most of your strengths and know what action to take. So let's get started. When we talk about developing your strengths, it's really important to start from the beginning. You've got all that data ahead of you, which we can't wait to get to, but actually, what does developing your strengths mean? How are you going to get there? So it's really important to explore your reactions, whether that's surprise, passionate, energized, or a bit sort of, maybe there's a story to tell that you're not quite sure. It's really important to explore those reactions in your profile, because all those trigger points that you've had a reaction to or a conversation or a way in which you can coach yourself later on. Help yourself understand the journey and success that those strengths and learned behaviours and realised strengths have had on your journey to date, so you can celebrate, appreciate and know what resource you've got ahead of you to be using in your future. Start to think about really being conscious about how you align future projects and tasks to what you've got in front of you, and that's full 60. There's a lot more data, whether it's strategic awareness or detail, they're going to look very different. So start to use the data and be a lot more conscious about which ones are going to suit the task you've got ahead of you. And then in the long term, we start thinking about career goals. So the career guide feature will help with this. But in the short term and long term, there may be sort of some clearer goals, or even some fuzzy goals that you could start to think, well, if I now want to people manage, what are the sorts of things in my strengths profile that are going to really help me? Maybe what's going to hinder me in the long term, in the short term, that's when we start to think about maybe your six month goal setting session with managers and teams. So really start to think about that conscious career going forward. Love this one. Define what you want to be known for. So it's really tempting to think about, success comes from things that you're good at, and probably people around you have always said, well done, around the things that you're good at. But strengths is much more than that, as you now know. And then if we want to take those strengths to the next level, so you're already good at them, you're already doing them, but we want to be able to really develop them and really own them for you, so that going forward, they're going to yield even more success. And then finally, when we talk about our strengths development, we talk about don't overplaying. It's the right strength for the right task at the right time. And I'm sure many of you will have heard me say that before. But particularly even more important now you're looking at the full 60 in front of you, that you're really dialing up the one that's going to be the most supportive for you, for others, and for the objective that you're achieving. So that's how we might think about developing strengths and using the data. Now let's come on to that data. So I'm just going to walk through the additional features within the expert profile. So you may already have an introductory profile, or you may be considering upgrading, or you don't know which profile to take. But the expert profile has some additional features. So it has everything that the introductory has, so you don't lose anything, you've not taken anything away. You have the 7 realised, 7 unrealised, full learned behaviours, and 3 weaknesses with the development advice. So just as it sits and currently stands with the introductory profile. But then we give you two chunky bits of data then to get your head around, which is what we're here to do today. And that's support you around your full 60. So what does your full 60 look across those 4 quadrants? So that's that image on the right-hand side. I will give you some tips and advice on that. And then we look at the strengths families. So there are 5 families here, which we'll come on to, but tips around the patterns of your strengths families and some direction around that, and then also what that looks like across the 4 quadrants within the strengths family as well. So with no further delay, let's get into those extra pieces of data for you. So the strengths families then, what are they? So they are a conceptual framework that helps us take those 60 strengths and start to think about kind of a communication framework, a way in which to describe those 60 that's kind of really helpful from a pattern and framework. So we put together 5, they are conceptual. And the first one there being, our way of being in the world. So how we kind of show up around our values and morals. And then we've got motivating, so that's our drive towards action, thinking, our approach to situations. And they're all very different. So whether you've got strategic awareness or detail, your approach to situations is going to to vary somewhat. Likewise with communicating, your listener versus your spotlight, two very different communicating strengths. So that's why the 60 is really important to help you think about not just the 60, but how the 60 kind of fit in terms of patterns and connections. And then finally, in the strengths families, you've got relating, so how we relate to others. So we'll cover all of those, maybe sort of some tips around how you might bring those to life and take action in your profile. So, and that's what we call be your own strengths expert here, because it's your data, you're in charge of your current goals and your future goals, career goals. So really it's about putting you in the driving seat with all that data and taking it to the next level. So let's look at that full 60 then and give you some tips around that. So I think the first thing that you can do is to take a step back really from it, because there's a lot there, and reflect on the bigger picture. So I don't want anybody beating themselves up about a large volume of learned behaviours. The average is around 24. So if you have, around that number, then you join the rest of us. But whatever your data looks like, just take a step back and think, how comfortably are you with it? It's good to have weaknesses that we can help others shine in that space, and thinking about your strengths to compensate. So here you get a full rounded picture of where all 60 sit in the full. So just take that sort of step back and think about your reaction to it. And what sort of maybe with other things here that were a surprise, and just look at the volume in each and just sort of start to think, well, actually, if I've got more in the orange and red space, then it's even more important for me to play towards my realised and unrealised strengths going forward. It helps you start to make really conscious decisions in the moment. So my number 8 is innovation. I kind of thought I'm quite good around ideas, but seeing it in paper or on the screen is really helpful to start sort of dialing it up and being really conscious about it. So knowing what you've got and where it sits in your profile can really help you think, I can get to that, but I'll get to that by the end of the week. Actually, I think I'm probably not the best person for the job. Actually, I can't wait to do that. And that's an unrealised strength. Really help you think about in the moment decisions about what to take, knowing where the data sits for you. It can really help with the action planning as well, around making sure that you're playing to strengths and getting those to support your weaknesses. So compensating with the right strength for the right weakness. Sometimes in the introductory, you're going to have to sort of make a guess really around what's the best one to compensate. But here you've got a wealth of data that really means you can find the right one to compensate. So if pride is a weakness, then how's your planning or your detail or your creativity or your organizer going to help you, and which one's going to be the best strength in that scenario? So in the moment action planning. And lastly, it's for that deeper reflection and celebration. This is you in your entirety. This is everything you've got to offer right now. And there's a wealth of data and information here. And the majority of it, remember, are going to be things that you do really well, because whether that's realised, unrealised, or learned behaviours, are things that you do really well. Now your job is to get that marker pen out and start crossing off some of those maybe learned behaviours and weaknesses that you really probably could do with avoiding, so that you can start to play with your strengths. So reflect on the wealth of resource that you've got in your toolbox within that full 60. Might not come overnight, but you can certainly start the process now you've got your expert profile. So let's look at the strengths families then and the patterns. So on the right here, you'll see the circle that's relating to relating. And you've got 5 of these in your profile: relating, communicating, thinking, motivating, and the being. So all of those you've got within the strengths families. And then what it does is it just takes sections of it and dissects it into the quadrants. So on this example, we can see clearly here that we have 4 strengths within the relating family that are realised. We have 2 that are unrealised. We have 5 that sit in the relating family that are learned behaviours, and we have 0 weaknesses in the relating family. So it gives you an overview of a picture of how you are when it comes to relating, how you show up. You can do it all, which is quite interesting from this example, but not all of it is actually energising and exciting for you. So that's where we want to start to pay attention. So what should we do then in terms of developing those strengths families? So take each one and start to think about which one has the most realised strengths, and then how does that serve you at home, at work, in your social environments, in your communities, at your teams. What does it look like if relating is slightly more drained for you? But so it means that you're going to need to start thinking about ones that you're really, the realised strengths that are really going to help support anything that's slightly more draining there. But when it comes to the families with the most realised strengths, it's really important that you make sure you don't overplay them as well. So we're looking at kind of which circle, the most realised strengths, and then of those, you're thinking to yourself, well, if thinking I've got the most, how do I show up? It clearly means that I'm very thoughtful. I'm going to give things a lot of consideration. I might be more detail focused. What does that look like? And of course, with that in mind, just making sure that we don't overplay them. So that's kind of looking at the ones with the most realised strengths. And then we've got maybe the family that's got the most unrealised strengths. So this is your potential. So as you know from the model, you really want to be developing these further. So how could you add value to others with these unrealised strengths? How can you consider your career goals? How can they support you today and in the future? So which ones really excite you? And if you've got quite a lot of, say, unrealised strengths in communicating, why is that? Why are you often sitting on the fence and maybe not kind of coming up with ideas and thoughts? So you can start to ask yourself, once you know the patterns, you can ask yourself these questions to really start to think about how you're going to move them forward. The unrealised strengths are really exciting potential opportunities for you. So we've touched on this a little bit, but which family then might have the most learned behaviours? Whatever it is, it's right for you and where you are now. Nothing to beat yourself up at all, because don't forget, learned behaviours, you're still doing it really well, but your energy is not here. So whatever family that might sit in, it's a case of thinking, well, actually, maybe just really focusing on the ones that do give you energy and giving yourself permission to dial back on some of the others. You want to be only using your learned behaviours when needed. So really starting to think about dialing those back if possible. And then finally, which family has the most weaknesses? So what are some of the other strengths in that family? So if connector or rapport builder or relationship deepener ended up being sort of all there in your weaknesses as a relating, then maybe you've got compassion and actually you're more thoughtful when it comes to relating rather than relating for the sake of it. So are there things within the family that could compensate? Or maybe it's another family entirely. If it was relating, then communicating is a great way to support you in dialing up some of those strengths if you've got those as well. So that's kind of how you might look at your family patterns and start to ask yourself some really important questions. And then finally, on the strengths families, explore each family in a little bit more depth here. So we've looked at kind of the patterns and taking note of where you've got large chunks of light green or orange. And this is now really starting to think about them in a bit more detail. So this will help you recognise within each family what you enjoy and what you don't. And if we look at the example that we've got here, so being, mission, authenticity, personal responsibility, moral compass, all being things that this person really enjoys, but curiosity and gratitude being things that they're struggling with. So it really starts to pull the family apart and think about actually which are really the things I want to be doing more of in that area and which are the things I probably want to be leaving to someone else. So review the one in the top is the highest, so communicating, it's humour for this person. And being is mission there in terms of the realised strength. So review the highest within each and think about the impact then that's having both on a good sense with your realised strengths and maybe what might need addressing with your weaknesses. How does that show up every day? How does humour show up for this person in their teamwork, within their families, when they're working perhaps on their own, and that might be a barrier because they prefer people. So thinking about these strengths and how you show up on each day. And how they currently benefit you, how is it successful? Mission for this person, authenticity, how are they contributing to success every day? So you can start to ask yourself these really powerful questions within each of the families. There'll be highs and lows for you, and really recognizing, actually, it's not that I'm good at communicating, but I love this bit about communicating, and this bit I would rather potentially leave to somebody else. So really getting a bit deeper here. And thinking about then how they might support your future goals, whether that's career goals or just things that you want to get done in the next couple of months, 6 months, a year. But how can you be more conscious about, okay, so I know this is a potential strength for me, the spotlight and narrator here around communicating. How can I do that more? with my future goals, and really aligning them, using that word conscious again. And how do they, these attributes that you've got here, whatever quadrant they're for, how do they support others? How can you use those to really lend a hand and support and others around you, and wherever that might be, whether that's at home, with your children, with your families, or within your teams, or within your stakeholders. How can you really dial these up to start thinking about others? And finally, are there any gaps? So if there were a complete gap here, let's say thinking, no realised strengths in thinking, you'd then start to look at the unrealised strengths. So what unrealised strengths have I got in thinking that I can start to move and develop further and use more so that they start to become realised strengths in the thinking family. So it's a great way to spot potentially where there could be some future issues, and start to really focus then your development on areas that are going to support you. So that's probably it in the expert profile, but there's some actions that you can do personally, but there's always more actions to be taken. So whether that's for yourself, for your team, if you're a leader or manager, for your people as well. And just a couple of things that I really want to highlight before I leave you is, I would encourage you, where possible, to find out your full 60 strengths, because it gives you so much more scope for your future development and career. And then obviously sharing that expert profile is really important. Plenty of resources on our Best Self website. It's all free. There are worksheets on there that are titled Exploring Your Strengths. So worth kind of reflecting, maybe even after this session, as a next steps. And then of course there are things that you can be doing for others and for your team as well, around real sort of strength spotting and celebrating other people's strengths, and working out which are going to be great strengths partners for you going forward as well. So there's more further reading in the Strengths Profile book as well. But for now, I'm going to wish you all the success in developing your strengths and going on that strengths journey. And good luck for the future. Thanks for listening.